For 20 years, the silence in my own house was the thing I feared the most. Today, it's the only thing I search for. I remember the exact moment when I first heard it. Real silence, I mean. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. It was 3 days after Marcus moved out, taking his opinions, his schedules, his constant corrections with him. I stood in the hallway of our house, the house that had always been ours, but never really mine, and I heard nothing, no footsteps above me, no voice calling out what I should be doing, no television droning on with the programs he chose. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of wind through the trees outside. And I panicked. My chest tightened. My hands started shaking. I grabbed my phone and called my sister Linda, whispering even though there was no one to overhear me. "I can't do this," I told her. "The house is too big, too empty. I need to sell it and move into an apartment, something smaller, something that doesn't feel like a museum of everything I lost." Linda, bless her, didn't try to talk me out of my fear. She just said, "Give it 2 weeks, Sarah. Just 2 weeks. If you still feel the same way, I'll help you pack." I didn't believe her, but I agreed, because I didn't know what else to do. That first week was the longest of my life. I was 45 years old, and I realized I had no idea how to be alone. I had gone from my parents' house to college roommates to Marcus, all without a single gap. I had never lived by myself, not for even a month. And now I was rattling around in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, surrounded by furniture I hadn't chosen and paint colors I'd never liked. Every sound made me jump. The house settled at night, and I would lie awake, convinced someone was breaking in. The heating system would kick on, and I'd freeze, listening for footsteps. I left every light on, even during the day. I slept with my phone next to my pillow, and the bedroom door locked, even though I was the only person in the house. During the day, I tried to stay busy. I threw myself into my work, answering emails at 6 in the morning, taking on extra projects, volunteering for committees I didn't care about. Anything to avoid going home. I would stop at the grocery store after work and wander the aisles for an hour, putting things in my cart that I didn't need, just to delay the moment when I'd have to turn onto my street and see that house waiting for me. I'd sit in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes sometimes, scrolling through my phone, reading articles I didn't care about, checking social media feeds that only made me feel worse. Other women my age were posting about their families, their trips, their anniversaries. And here I was, afraid to walk into my own home. The second week, something shifted, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I came home one evening after a particularly draining day at work, dropped my bags in the kitchen, and just stood there. I was too tired to be afraid, too exhausted to perform the elaborate ritual of checking every room, turning on every light, distracting myself with television I didn't want to watch. So I just stood there in the semi-darkness with only the kitchen light on, and I breathed. And in that moment of stillness, I heard it again, the silence. But this time, instead of panic, I felt something else, something I couldn't quite name yet. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it wasn't terror either. It was more like curiosity. I walked into the living room and looked around, really looked, for the first time since Marcus left. The room was decorated in shades of gray and navy blue, his favorite colors. The furniture was all dark wood and leather, heavy and masculine. The artwork on the walls were vintage maps and framed sports jerseys, his choices from years ago. I had suggested once, maybe 10 years into our marriage, that we could add some color. Maybe some brighter throw pillows or a different rug. He'd looked at me like I'd suggested burning the house down. "This is a classic look, Sarah," he'd said. "It's timeless. It doesn't need to be changed." And that had been that. I never brought it up again. But now, standing in that room alone, I thought about something I hadn't allowed myself to think in years. I hate this room. The realization hit me like cold water. I hate these colors. I hate this furniture. I hate these maps on the walls that mean nothing to me. This isn't my home. It never was. And suddenly, I wasn't curious anymore. I was angry. The anger felt good. It felt alive. It felt like the opposite of the numbness I'd been living in for so long. I walked over to the largest framed map, the one Marcus had hung above the sofa himself, using a level and measuring tape, taking almost 2 hours to get it exactly right. I lifted it off the wall. It was heavier than I expected, and for a moment I almost put it back. Almost heard his voice in my head, telling me I was going to drop it. I was going to break it. I never did anything carefully enough. But I didn't drop it. I carried it to the garage and set it down. Then I went back for the next one, and the next one. By the end of the evening, I had removed every piece of artwork from the living room walls. The space looked strange with all those rectangular shadows where frames had protected the paint from fading. But it also looked like possibility, like a blank canvas, like maybe, just maybe, I could make this space into something that felt like mine. I didn't know it then, but removing those maps would be the first battle in a much larger war. One that would cost me more than I imagined. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. I dreamed about colors I hadn't thought about in years. Bright corals and worn yellows and deep teals. I woke up before my alarm, feeling something I barely recognized. Energy. Purpose. I had a plan. At work that day, I could barely concentrate. During my lunch break, I browsed paid samples online. I created a private Pinterest board and started pinning images of living rooms that made me feel something. Rooms that were bright and welcoming and nothing like the cave I'd been living in. I felt almost guilty, like I was doing something illicit, planning to change things without asking permission. Then I reminded myself, I don't need permission. This is my house. The thought was so new, so strange, that I whispered it out loud to make it real. This is my house. That weekend, I went to the hardware store. I wandered through the paint section for over an hour, holding up different sample cards, imagining them on my walls. A young clerk, probably in his 20s, approached me and asked if I needed help. I want to repaint my living room, I told him, but I don't know what color. He smiled and asked me what colors I liked. What colors I liked. Such a simple question, but I stood there frozen because I realized I didn't know. I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked me what I liked. Take your time, he said kindly, and moved on to help another customer. I stood there among the paint chips, feeling ridiculous. I was a grown woman, a professional with a master's degree, and I couldn't choose a paint color. Marcus had always made these decisions. He'd decided on the gray and navy. He'd chosen the wood floors over carpet. He'd selected the granite countertops in the kitchen. I had nodded and agreed because it was easier than fighting, and because somewhere along the way, I'd started to believe that his opinions were more valid than mine, that his taste was better, that he knew best. But he wasn't here anymore, and I could paint my walls bright purple if I wanted to. I could paint each wall a different color. I could paint the ceiling. It was my house, my choice, my life. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I finally chose a color called sand dune, a warm, peachy beige that reminded me of a vacation Marcus and I had taken to the coast during our second year of marriage, before things got so complicated. I bought the paint, the brushes, the rollers, the blue tape for the edges. The clerk helped me load everything into my car. And I drove home feeling like I was getting away with something. Like any moment, someone would stop me and tell me I wasn't allowed to do this. But no one stopped me. I pulled into my driveway, carried everything inside, and spread it all out in the living room. It looked like a lot more than I'd thought. I pulled up some YouTube videos on my phone, watching tutorials on how to paint a room properly. I changed into old clothes I'd been meaning to throw away. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I moved the furniture to the center of the room, laid down the drop cloths, and poured the first pan of paint. The first brushstroke was harder than I expected. My hand trembled as I pressed the brush to the wall, leaving a streak of peachy beige over the gray. It looked wrong. It looked too bright, too different, too much. I almost stopped right there, but something made me keep going. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the memory of all those years of agreeing to things I didn't want. Maybe it was just that I'd already spent the money and it seemed wasteful to quit. I kept painting. By the end of the day, I had finished one wall. My arms ached. I had paint in my hair and on my face. My back was sore from reaching up to the corners, but I stepped back and looked at that single wall, now a warm, sandy color instead of cold gray. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. I did that. By myself. Without anyone's help or permission or approval. It wasn't perfect. I could see where the paint was a little thicker in some spots, where the edges weren't completely straight. But it was mine. When I finally finished, when I peeled off the last piece of blue tape and moved the furniture back into place, I stood in the doorway of my living room and cried. Not sad tears, but something more complicated. Relief, maybe, or grief for all the years I'd spent living in a space that didn't feel like mine. Or joy that I was finally changing that. Probably all of it mixed together, a tangle of emotions I didn't try to sort out. I just let myself feel them. I took a picture of the room and sent it to Linda. She called me immediately. "Sarah, that looks amazing," she said. "How do you feel?" I thought about her question. How did I feel? I feel, I said slowly, like I just won something. She laughed. "You did. You won your house back." But I hadn't won it back. Not yet. Because 3 days later, Marcus showed up unannounced. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard his key in the lock. I'd forgotten he still had a key. He walked in like he still lived there, calling out my name. I came out of the kitchen to find him standing in the living room, staring at the walls with an expression I knew too well: disapproval, anger, control starting to slip. "What did you do?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but I heard the edge in it. "You painted." "Yes," I said. My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "I did. Sarah, this is insane. This house is still half mine until the divorce is final. You can't just change things without consulting me. We're supposed to make these decisions together." He walked around the room, shaking his head. "This color is awful. It looks cheap. It looks like a beach motel. What were you thinking?" For a moment, just a moment, I felt myself shrinking, apologizing, explaining, defending my choice. That's what I would have done a year ago, a month ago, maybe even a week ago. But something had changed in me during those hours of painting, during those quiet evenings of transforming my space. I had remembered something important. I didn't need his approval. "I wasn't thinking about you, Marcus," I said quietly. "I was thinking about me. I was thinking that I live here alone now. And I wanted walls that make me happy, and these do. "You'll have to change it back," he said. "Not a request, a command. When we sell the house, we needed to appeal to buyers. We need neutral colors. This will have to be fixed." "No," I said. Just that one word. No. He stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I'm not changing it back. If you want it repainted before we sell, you're welcome to come do it yourself. But I'm not doing it." My voice was shaking now, but not from fear, from something else, from standing my ground for the first time in longer than I could remember. Marcus took a step toward me, his jaw tight. "Sarah, be reasonable. You're being emotional. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking very clearly," I said, "and I'm done with this conversation. I'd like you to leave now, and I'd like you to leave your key." "My key? Sarah, this is still my house." "Our house," I corrected, "until the divorce is final. But I live here. You don't. And you don't get to walk in anymore whenever you want. Leave the key, Marcus." We stood there in my newly painted living room, facing each other, across a distance that was about so much more than physical space. This was 20 years of my voice getting smaller, my opinions mattering less, myself getting lost in the project of being his wife. And this was me finally drawing a line. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his keychain. He removed the house key and dropped it on the coffee table with a sharp clink. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I said. "But it will be my mistake to make." He left. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, my whole body shaking now that he was gone. But underneath the shaking was something solid, something that felt like bedrock. I had stood up to him. I had said no. And the world hadn't ended. I called Linda again. He was here, I told her. He was angry about the paint, and I didn't apologize. I could hear the smile in her voice when she said, "Good for you, Sarah. How does it feel?" I thought about it. "Scary," I admitted. "But good. Really good." That night, I sat in my living room in my peachy beige space that looked nothing like the room Marcus had designed, and I made a list. Not a to-do list, but a what do I actually like list. What colors made me happy, what music I enjoyed, what foods I wanted to eat, what hobbies I'd given up or never tried because Marcus thought they were silly or impractical or a waste of time. The list was longer than I expected, and sadder because it showed me just how much of myself I'd packed away over the years. Tucked into storage like those boxes in the attic that you mean to go through someday, but never do. But someday was now, and I was going through the boxes. The next room I tackled was the bedroom. Marcus and I had shared that room for 20 years, and everything in it was designed around his needs and preferences. The bed faced the direction he preferred. The curtains were heavy blackout drapes because he couldn't sleep with any light. The dresser configuration gave him more drawer space because he had more clothes. Even the temperature was set to his comfort level. cold enough that I'd slept under extra blankets every night for years. I started by adjusting the thermostat. Such a small thing, but it felt revolutionary. I set it to 72 degrees, warm enough that I could sleep without being buried under covers. Then I opened the curtains during the day, letting in light. The bedroom had a beautiful window that looked out onto the backyard. But I'd barely noticed it in years because those curtains were always closed. I bought new bedding, nothing expensive, just a set from Target in a pattern of soft blues and greens with little white flowers. Marcus would have hated it. He would have said it was too feminine, too busy, too much. I loved it. I washed it and made the bed and then sat on it, looking around the room. It was starting to feel different. Not completely mine yet, but moving in that direction. I was taking down the heavy curtains, wrestling with the rod and the brackets, when I made a discovery. Behind the headboard, tucked against the wall, where it had clearly fallen and been forgotten, was a small notebook. I pulled it out, curious, and opened it, and I saw my own handwriting from almost 20 years ago. It was a journal I'd kept during the first year of our marriage. I'd completely forgotten about it. I sat down on the bedroom floor, still holding the curtain rod, and started to read. And what I found there broke my heart. The entries were filled with hope and excitement and love, yes, but they were also filled with small doubts, tiny concerns that I'd clearly been trying to talk myself out of. Marcus didn't like the restaurant I chose for his birthday, so I guess I need to get better at knowing what he'd enjoy. I wanted to take a painting class, but Marcus thinks I should focus on my career instead. And he's probably right. We had a fight about me spending time with Linda instead of going to his work function. I should be more supportive of his career. Entry after entry of me shrinking, adjusting, accommodating, convincing myself that his way was better. His judgment was sounder. His needs were more important. I stood up, grabbed the curtains, and carried them to the garage. I wasn't keeping them. I wasn't storing them in case I changed my mind. They were going to donation, along with so many other things that belonged to a version of my life I was done living. Then I went back upstairs and finished taking down all the curtain rods. I'd buy new ones, lighter ones that could hold sheer curtains that let the light in. But that could wait. For now, I left the windows bare and the sunlight poured in, bright and warm and welcome. Over the next few weeks, I continued my transformation of the house. I moved through each room like a storm, or maybe like spring cleaning on steroids, removing everything that didn't feel like me. I donated Marcus's books, his sports memorabilia, his collection of bourbon that had sat on a shelf in the den like trophies. I rearranged furniture to suit my needs, not his traffic patterns. I brought in plants, lots of plants, because I'd always loved them, but Marcus complained about the mess they made and the gnats they attracted. I painted the dining room a soft sage green. I painted my home office a cheerful yellow. I even painted the hallway, which Marcus would have said was a waste of time and money because it's just a hallway. But I wanted to walk through my house and feel joy in every space, even the transitional ones, maybe especially those. My sister came over one Saturday to help me hang new artwork, not maps or sports jerseys, but prints I'd chosen from an online shop run by a local artist, watercolors of flowers and landscapes, bright and gentle, and making me feel peaceful just looking at them. Linda and I spent the afternoon measuring and hanging, arguing good-naturedly about whether things were level, laughing when we got one crooked and decided we liked it that way. "You know what?" Linda said, stepping back to admire a particularly lovely print of poppies in a field. "This house, finally, all those years I'd come over and something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just not right. Like I was visiting you in someone else's house. But now," she gestured around, "now it feels like Sarah lives here." Her words meant more to me than she probably knew, because that's exactly what I was doing. I was moving into my own life, my own space, my own self. At 45 years old, I was finally coming home. The physical changes to the house were just the beginning. The real transformation was happening inside me in ways that were harder to describe, but more profound. I started noticing things about myself, preferences and desires that had been buried for so long I'd forgotten they existed. I liked eating dinner at 9 o'clock instead of 6:30. I liked watching romantic comedies without someone sighing heavily next to me about how unrealistic they were. I liked listening to podcasts about art history and true crime and psychology, all subjects Marcus had found boring. I liked going to bed early with a book and reading until I fell asleep, without having to coordinate bedtimes or compromise on when the lights went off. I liked the silence, that terrifying silence from those first few days had become my favorite thing. The house wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. I would come home from work and stand in the kitchen, listening to nothing, and feel my shoulders drop, my jaw unclench, my breathing slow. This was what relaxation felt like. I'd almost forgotten. I started cooking differently too. Marcus had been a meat and potatoes person, insisting on substantial dinners every night. I discovered I preferred lighter meals, salads and soups and cheese plates with fruit. Some nights I ate popcorn for dinner and didn't feel guilty about it. Some nights I didn't eat dinner at all, just snacked throughout the evening while I painted or read or organized the closets. The freedom to make these small choices, to live according to my own rhythms instead of accommodating someone else's, felt enormous. I also started rediscovering old passions. I found my old sketchbooks from college, buried in a box in the attic. I'd loved drawing once, had even considered an art degree before choosing the more practical path of business. I paged through those sketchbooks, looking at the careful pencil studies and the loose charcoal sketches, and I felt a pang of grief for the girl who'd made these. What would her life have looked like? But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a 45-year-old woman with a divorce pending and a house to herself and time to fill. So I bought new sketchbooks and new pencils. I set up a small studio space in the corner of my office, just a desk by the window with good light and a jar to hold my supplies. And I started drawing again. At first, my hand was rusty. The lines wobbled. The proportions were off. I got frustrated, crumpling up pages and throwing them away. But then I remembered something one of my college professors had said. The only way to get better at art is to make bad art first. Lots of it. So much bad art that you can't help but stumble into something good eventually. So I gave myself permission to be bad at this, to relearn something I'd once known, to be a beginner again. I drew the plants in my living room. I drew the view from my bedroom window. I drew my coffee cup, my shoes by the door, the pile of books on my nightstand. Simple objects from my daily life, but they were my objects, my life, and drawing them felt like a way of paying attention, of saying, "This matters, you matter." One evening, I was sketching at my little desk when my phone rang. It was Marcus. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Sarah," he said, his voice stiff. "I wanted to inform you that I'll need to come by the house next week. My lawyer says I have a right to inspect the property before the sale." "Fine," I said, "but call first. Don't just show up." "I wouldn't have to call if you hadn't taken my key," he said, an edge of bitterness in his voice. "Yes, you would," I said calmly, "because it's the respectful thing to do, and because I'm not your wife anymore, Marcus. I'm your ex-wife-to-be, and you don't get to walk into my space unannounced." There was a long silence. Then he said, "You've changed." "Yes," I agreed. "I have." "Not for the better," he added. I looked around my yellow office, at my drawings tacked to the wall, at the plant on the windowsill, at the sunlight streaming in. "I disagree," I said. "Call me before you come over. Goodbye, Marcus." And I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking again, but I felt good, strong. Each time I stood up to him, it got a little easier. The script I'd been following for 20 years, the one where I deferred and accommodated and made myself smaller, was being rewritten. And I was the one holding the pen. Marcus did call before he came over, although he only gave me a day's notice. He arrived with his lawyer, a severe woman in a dark suit who walked through my house with a clipboard, making notes. Marcus trailed behind her, his face carefully blank, but I saw his jaw tighten when he looked at the peachy living room, the sage dining room, the yellow office. He didn't say anything about them, though. just followed his lawyer in silence. When they'd finished their inspection, the lawyer said, "We'll be in touch with our recommendations for preparing the property for sale." Marcus lingered after she left, standing in the foyer. "Sarah," he started, then stopped. He looked around, seeming lost for words. "This place looks so different." "It does," I agreed, not offering anything more. "I'd barely recognize it." "That's the point." He met my eyes then, and I saw something there I hadn't expected. Not anger, but something sadder. Loss, maybe, or confusion. "I don't recognize you either," he said quietly. "Good," I said, not unkindly. "I'm finally becoming someone worth recognizing." He left without another word. After he was gone, I walked through my transformed house, looking at everything with fresh eyes. He was right. It did look different, because it was different. It was mine in a way it had never been before. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every small decoration was a choice I had made without compromise or consultation. And more than that, it was a physical manifestation of something internal. I was reclaiming my space, yes, but more importantly, I was reclaiming myself. The months passed. Spring turned to summer. The divorce proceedings continued, slow and bureaucratic, and sometimes contentious. There were arguments about assets and timelines. There were lawyer bills and paperwork and tense phone calls. But through it all, I kept working on my house, and by extension, on myself. I took that painting class I'd mentioned in my old journal. It was held at a community center on Saturday mornings, and the room was filled with mostly older women, all of us learning to work with watercolors. I was terrible at first. My skies were muddy. My trees looked like lollipops. My color mixing was a disaster. But I loved it. I loved the feel of the brush in my hand, the way the paint bloomed on wet paper, the problem solving of trying to capture light and shadow. I loved the way 2 hours would pass without me thinking once about Marcus or the divorce or anything stressful. One of the other women in the class, a retired teacher named Margaret, invited me to join her for coffee after class one morning. We sat in a cafe near the community center, and she told me about her life. She'd been married for 40 years before her husband died. She'd taken up painting as a way to fill the empty hours. The house felt so big after he was gone, she said. Too much space for just me. But I didn't want to move, so I had to figure out how to fill it differently. Not with another person, but with myself. Does that make sense? It makes perfect sense, I said. And I told her about my situation, about the divorce and the painting and the slow process of figuring out who I was when I wasn't being Marcus's wife. Margaret nodded knowingly. The hardest part isn't the being alone, she said. It's the learning to be good company for yourself, to enjoy your own presence, That takes practice. She was right. It did take practice. There were still hard days when the loneliness felt heavy, when I missed having someone to talk to about small things, when I saw couples doing ordinary activities and felt a sharp pang of loss. But those days became less frequent. And in between them, I was discovering something surprising. I liked my own company. I liked having conversations with myself while I cooked dinner. I liked making plans for the weekend that suited only me, with no one else's preferences to consider. I liked waking up on Saturday morning and deciding in that moment whether I wanted to be productive or lazy, social or solitary. I liked the freedom of it, the spaciousness of a life that was mine to design. I started taking myself on dates. That's what Linda called them when I told her about it. "You're dating yourself," she said, laughing. "That's adorable and also very healthy." I would go to museums alone, moving through the galleries at my own pace, spending 20 minutes in front of a painting if I wanted to, or breezing through rooms that didn't interest me. I went to movies by myself, buying a large popcorn and sitting in the middle of the row, not caring if it was weird to be alone. I went to restaurants and brought a book, savoring both the food and the reading without feeling self-conscious. At first, I was very aware of being alone in public, sure that everyone was judging me, pitying me. But gradually, I realized no one cared. And more than that, I started seeing other people alone too, people I might not have noticed before. A woman my age eating lunch at a bistro, reading something on her tablet. An older man at the art museum, sketching in a notebook. A young person at the movie theater, fully absorbed in the film. We were all just living our lives, keeping our own company, and there was nothing sad about it. It was actually kind of beautiful. I also started making new friends, or rather, deepening connections I'd let fade during my marriage. I reached out to women I'd worked with, suggesting coffee or lunch. I joined a book club that met monthly at the library. I said yes to invitations I would have previously declined because Marcus wouldn't have wanted to go or wouldn't have approved of the people or the activity. And I discovered that I was interesting, that I had things to contribute to conversations, that people enjoyed my company. I'd forgotten that, or maybe I'd never fully believed it. One evening at book club, we were discussing a novel about a woman reinventing her life after a major loss. One of the other members, a woman named Rachel, who'd been divorced for several years, said, "You know what no one tells you about divorce? That it can be a gift. I mean, it's also terrible and painful and expensive and all of that. But it can also be this amazing opportunity to figure out who you are outside of the marriage, to build a life that actually fits you." Everyone nodded, and I felt a rush of gratitude for this group of women, many of whom had been through their own versions of what I was experiencing. They understood. They didn't judge. They didn't tell me to move on or get back out there or any of the other useless platitudes people sometimes offered. They just shared their stories and listened to mine, and that was exactly what I needed. By the time fall arrived, my divorce was nearly final. Just a few more signatures, a few more legal procedures, and I would be officially unmarried, single, alone. Words that had terrified me a year ago, but now felt like freedom. The house was completely transformed. Every room reflected my taste, my choices, my personality. I'd even tackled the garage and the attic, clearing out boxes of things that belonged to our old life, Marcus's old life. A version of me that no longer existed. I donated most of it. Some things I threw away. A few items, photos mostly, I kept in one small box. Not because I wanted to look at them regularly, but because they were part of my history, part of how I'd gotten here. I was sitting in my living room one October evening, the peachy walls glowing in the lamplight, when I realized something. I was happy. Not the manic, desperate happiness of someone trying to convince themselves everything was fine, but real, solid, quiet happiness, contentment. I liked my life. I liked my house. I liked the person I was becoming. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "How are you doing, sis?" I looked around my living room. At the plants thriving on the windowsill, at my sketchbook on the coffee table, at the new artwork on the walls. I thought about my watercolor class in the morning, about the book I was reading, about the dinner I'd cook for myself later. Simple and exactly what I wanted. "I'm good," I texted back. "Really good." She sent back a string of heart emojis, and I smiled, because it was true. I was good. Better than I'd been in years. Maybe better than I'd ever been. The divorce was finalized in November. I went to the courthouse with my lawyer, signed the papers, listened to the judge say the official words that dissolved my marriage. And then I walked out into the crisp autumn air, legally single for the first time in over 2 decades. I expected to feel something dramatic, some big emotional release. But mostly, I felt calm, like closing a chapter I'd already been finished reading for a while. I drove home, to my house, mine alone now, according to the divorce settlement. I'd bought out Marcus's share, which had required some financial maneuvering, but it had been worth it. This was my space, my sanctuary, my achievement. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, and the silence greeted me like an old friend. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls I'd painted, adjusting the plants, straightening the artwork. This house had been a prison for so long, a place where I'd felt trapped and small and invisible. But I'd transformed it, room by room, into something else entirely. A home, my home, a place where I could breathe and grow and become whoever I wanted to be. That evening, I did something I'd been planning for weeks. I invited people over. Not for a divorce party. Exactly. though Linda had joked that's what it was. Just a small gathering of the friends I'd made or reconnected with over the past months. Linda and her husband, Margaret from painting class, Rachel and 2 other women from book club, a colleague from work I'd gotten close to. 10 people total, filling my living room with conversation and laughter. I'd cooked, actually enjoyed cooking for guests, making dishes I liked instead of trying to please everyone. I'd set out wine and cheese and lit candles. I'd put on music I loved, jazz that Marcus had always said was too pretentious. And I watched these people, my people, gathered in my space, and I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Linda found me in the kitchen refilling a cheese plate. She put her arm around me and squeezed. "Look at you," she said. "Look at this life you've built." "It's pretty good, isn't it?" I said. "It's better than good. It's yours." Later that night, after everyone had left and I'd cleaned up the last of the dishes, I stood in my living room again, the same spot where I'd stood almost a year ago, terrified and alone, hearing the silence and not knowing how I would survive it. And I thought about everything that had happened since then. The painting, the redecorating, the rediscovering of myself, the hard conversations with Marcus, the moments of standing my ground, the watercolor classes and the solo museum visits, and the books I'd read and the sketches I'd made. All of it had been leading me here, to this moment, to this feeling of being home in my own life. I sat down on my sofa, the one I'd moved to a different position because I liked the view better this way, and I pulled out my phone. I opened my notes app and started writing, not for anyone else, just for me. A record of this moment, the way I'd kept that journal in the early days of my marriage. But this was different. This was a journal of becoming myself instead of losing myself. Today, I wrote, I realized that I've stopped being afraid of the silence. I've stopped being afraid of being alone because I finally understood that alone doesn't mean lonely, and silence doesn't mean empty. Alone means free. Silence means peace. And after 20 years of noise, of someone else's voice always telling me what to think and feel and do, the silence is exactly what I need. I kept writing, letting the words flow. I wrote about the colors on my walls and what they meant to me. I wrote about the first time I'd stood up to Marcus, how scared and exhilarated I'd felt. I wrote about Margaret's words about learning to be good company for yourself and how that had become my daily practice. I wrote about the small joys I'd discovered, like eating popcorn for dinner or spending an entire Saturday in my pajamas drawing. I wrote about the bigger joys, too, like genuine friendships and creative pursuits, and the simple freedom of making choices without negotiating or compromising. For so long, I wrote, I thought I needed someone else to be complete. I thought a relationship was supposed to be two halves making a whole. But that's not right. I'm already whole. I was always whole. I just forgot it for a while. And now I'm remembering. I'm reclaiming all the parts of myself that I'd set aside or lost or given away. And I'm discovering that I'm enough. Just me, by myself, in this house I've made into a home. I'm enough. I closed the Notes app and set down my phone. Outside, the November wind rustled the trees, and I could hear it through the windows. Not a scary sound anymore. Just the sound of the world turning, seasons changing, life continuing. Inside, my house was warm and peaceful and mine. The next morning, I woke up early and went straight to my little studio space. I'd been working on a watercolor piece in class, a landscape of the view from my bedroom window, and I wanted to practice it at home. I set up my paints and paper, mixed my colors carefully, and began to work. The sun rose as I painted, filling the room with golden light, and I lost myself in the process. Hours passed without me noticing. When I finally stepped back to look at what I'd created, I was surprised to see it was actually good. Not perfect, not museum-worthy, but genuinely good. The trees had depth. The sky had movement. The whole piece had a feeling to it, a sense of peace and morning light that matched what I'd been trying to capture. I'd done that. I'd made something beautiful. I took a picture of it and sent it to Margaret. She responded within minutes. "Sarah, this is wonderful. You've improved so much. You should submit something to the community center's art show in December." The art show? I'd heard about it in class, but hadn't considered participating. It was for local artists to display and sell their work. A small event, but still intimidating. The old me would have immediately dismissed the idea, would have said I wasn't good enough, wasn't a real artist. Who was I to think anyone would want to see my work? But the new me, the one I was becoming, thought about it differently. Why not? What was the worst that could happen? No one would buy anything, maybe. But so what? I'd still have tried. I'd still have put myself out there. And that felt important, somehow. That act of saying, I made this, and I think it's worth sharing. I'll think about it, I texted back. But I was already thinking about which pieces I might submit, already feeling that flutter of nervous excitement that came with doing something brave. I spent the next few weeks preparing for the show. I chose 5 pieces, my best work, and had them professionally framed, which felt like a bigger investment than just the money. It was an investment in myself, in my art, in the idea that I was someone whose work deserved to be presented well. I filled out the application, wrote a short artist statement, and submitted everything before I could overthink it. While I waited to hear if I'd been accepted, I continued working on the house. There were still small projects to finish. I wanted to redo the guest bathroom, which still had Marcus's masculine blue tile. I wanted to create a reading nook in my bedroom, a cozy corner with a comfortable chair and good lighting. I wanted to plant bulbs in the garden so there would be flowers in the spring. my first spring in this house as truly mine. The garden was something I'd neglected during my marriage. Marcus had hired a lawn service to handle everything, and I'd rarely even gone outside except to get in the car. But now I found myself drawn to it, this plot of earth that was mine to tend. I bought gardening gloves and tools. I watched YouTube videos about what to plant in my region and when. I spent weekends pulling weeds and turning soil and setting bulbs carefully into the ground, imagining the flowers they'd become. It was physical work, harder than painting walls, and my body ached afterward. But it was also meditative, grounding in a literal sense. My hands in the dirt, the sun on my back, the smell of earth and growing things. I felt connected to something larger than myself, part of a cycle of seasons and growth that had been happening long before me and would continue long after. One Saturday, while I was working in the garden, my neighbor from 2 houses down, a woman named Carol, who I'd only ever waved to before, came over to chat. "Your yard is looking wonderful," she said. "I've been watching you work on it. You've got a good eye for color." We talked for a while about plants and gardens, and she mentioned she was part of a neighborhood garden club that met monthly. "You should come," she said. "We're always looking for new members, and honestly, it's just an excuse for a bunch of women to drink wine and talk about plants." I laughed and said I'd think about it, but I knew I would go. This was part of it too, part of building a life that was rich and full and connected. Not just transforming my house, but integrating myself into my community, making connections, putting down roots. The acceptance letter from the art show came in early December. My work had been chosen to display. I would have a small section of wall space, enough for all 5 of my pieces. The opening reception was in 2 weeks. I could bring guests. There would be wine and cheese. People would look at my art, maybe even buy it. I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. I invited my small circle of friends to the opening. I bought a new dress, deep green with a simple cut, something that felt artistic, but not like I was trying too hard. I was more nervous than I'd been about anything in years. These pieces of paper with paint on them felt like pieces of me exposed for judgment. What if people hated them? What if no one looked at them at all? What if this was a huge mistake? But the night of the opening, I walked into the community center with Linda beside me, and I saw my work hung on the wall, properly framed and lit, looking more professional than I'd imagined. My name was on a small placard below them. Sarah Mitchell, watercolors. Not Sarah and Marcus Mitchell. Not Mrs. Marcus Mitchell, which is how I'd been addressed at so many of his work functions. Just Sarah Mitchell. Just me. People came and looked at my work. Some moved on quickly, more interested in other artists' pieces. But some lingered. Some asked me questions about my process, my inspiration. Some said kind things that made me blush and stammer. And before the night was half over, 2 of my pieces had red dots on them. Sold. people had actually paid money for something I'd created. I stood there staring at those red dots, feeling tears prick my eyes. Linda squeezed my hand. "You did it," she said. "You put yourself out there, and look what happened." "I can't believe it," I whispered. "I can," she said. "You're talented, Sarah. You always were. You just finally gave yourself permission to try." The buyer of one of the pieces, an older gentleman with kind eyes, came over to talk to me. "I bought the one of the garden in morning light," he said. "It reminds me of my mother's garden when I was a child. You've captured something special there, that quality of early light, the promise of the day beginning. Thank you for creating it." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just nodded and smiled, but his words meant everything to me. Someone had seen what I was trying to express. Someone had connected with my art, had felt something because of it. That was more valuable than the money, though the money was nice too. It was the connection, the communication, the proof that I had something worth sharing. That night, back at home, I hung the remaining 3 pieces in my house. One in the living room, one in my bedroom, one in the office. Little reminders of what I was capable of what I'd built and created and become. I looked at them and felt proud, genuinely, deeply proud of myself in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever felt before. December settled in with its usual chaos of holidays and expectations. This was the first Christmas I'd spend alone, and I'd been dreading it. Marcus and I had always hosted his family, a loud, overwhelming gathering that I'd spent weeks preparing for, and then felt exhausted by. His mother had particular expectations about the menu, the decorations, the way things should be done. I'd always tried so hard to meet those expectations, to be the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect hostess. But this year, I had no expectations to meet but my own. Linda invited me to her house for Christmas, and I was planning to go for part of the day. But I also had Christmas morning to myself, and I decided to make it exactly what I wanted. I bought a small tree, nothing like the massive 8-footer Marcus had always insisted on. My tree was maybe 4 feet tall, just right for my living room. I decorated it with lights and ornaments that made me happy. Not the coordinated silver and blue scheme Marcus had preferred, but a chaotic mix of colorful, whimsical decorations. Some I bought, some I made myself in a crafting fit one evening. It was imperfect and cheerful and mine. Christmas morning, I woke up slowly, no alarm, no schedule to keep. I made myself a fancy coffee drink with the espresso machine I'd bought myself as an early Christmas present. I sat by my little tree in my pajamas, watching the lights twinkle, listening to music, feeling utterly content. No cooking marathon ahead of me, no in-laws to host, no one's approval to seek, just me and my peaceful house and the whole day stretching ahead, full of possibility. I video called my parents, who'd retired to Florida, and had been supportive through the divorce, even though they'd initially been shocked by it. "You look good, honey," my mom said. "You look happy." "I am," I told her. "I really am." "You're proud of you," my dad added. "It takes courage to start over." Later, at Linda's house, surrounded by her family, I felt grateful for the love and inclusion. But I also felt grateful that I had my own space to return to, my own sanctuary. I left in the early evening, driving through the decorated neighborhood. And when I pulled into my driveway and saw my house, my little tree visible through the front window, I felt it again. That sense of being home. The new year arrived with its usual promises of fresh starts and new beginnings. I had always been skeptical of New Year's resolutions, the way people use them as excuses to completely remake themselves, as if January 1st had magical, transformative powers. But this year felt different. This year, I wasn't trying to become someone new. I was trying to continue becoming more fully myself. I made a list, not of resolutions, but of intentions. Things I wanted to explore, try, experience. Not obligations, but invitations to myself. Take another art class, maybe in a different medium. Travel somewhere I'd always wanted to go, maybe alone, maybe with a friend. Join the garden club Carol had mentioned. Keep working on the house, finishing those last few projects. Read more, draw more. Say yes to opportunities that scared me a little. Say no to things that didn't serve me, even if saying no was uncomfortable. Most importantly, I intended to continue practicing being good company for myself, to keep learning to enjoy my own presence, to trust my own judgment, to celebrate my own small victories. Because that was the real transformation, the one that mattered most. Not the painted walls or the new furniture, or even the watercolors I was learning to create. It was the internal shift, the slow rebuilding of my sense of self, the reclaiming of my voice and my space and my life. In January, I signed up for a pottery class. Something completely new, something I'd never tried before. The first class was intimidating, my hands clumsy with the clay, unable to center it on the wheel. But the instructor, a patient woman in her 60s, showed me how to lean in, how to use my body weight, how to trust the process. "The clay will tell you what it wants to be," she said. "Your job is to listen." I thought about that a lot. Not just in terms of pottery, but in terms of my whole life. What did I want to be? What was I becoming? And was I listening to myself? Really listening? Or was I still following old scripts, old patterns, old voices that weren't my own? By February, I was starting to get the hang of the pottery wheel. I'd made several lopsided bowls and a vase that was more abstract than I'd intended, but that I actually kind of loved. I brought them home and placed them around my house, these imperfect creations, proof of my willingness to be a beginner, to try new things, to fail and keep going. I also joined the garden club and found, as Carol had promised, that it was mostly an excuse for interesting women to gather and talk. We did discuss plants and gardening, but we also talked about our lives, our challenges, our victories. Many of them were older than me, women in their 60s and 70s who had decades of life experience to share. They'd been through divorces, widowhood, career changes, health scares, all sorts of transitions. And they'd survived. More than survived, they'd thrived. They were vibrant and funny and wise, and I felt lucky to know them. ... One evening at Garden Club, we were talking about the difficulty of change, how scary it was to leave the familiar, even when the familiar was making us unhappy. An older woman named Dorothy, who'd been divorced for 30 years, said something that struck me. "The thing about starting over," she said, "is that you're not actually starting from zero. You're starting from experience. You know things now that you didn't know before. You've learned things even from the hard times, especially from the hard times. So it's not starting over, it's starting again, but from a place of wisdom." I thought about that as I drove home that night. She was right. I wasn't starting from nothing. I had 20 years of marriage, 20 years of learning what I didn't want, what didn't work for me. I had 45 years of life experience, of successes and failures and everything in between. I had skills and knowledge and resilience I hadn't known I possessed. This wasn't a restart. It was a continuation, a new chapter, but in the same book of my life. By March, spring was beginning to show itself. The bulbs I'd planted in the fall were starting to push through the soil. Green shoots promising future flowers. I spent more time outside, cleaning up the garden beds, planning what else I wanted to plant. I bought vegetable seeds, thinking I'd try growing tomatoes and peppers and herbs. Something about the idea of growing my own food felt important, connected to my larger project of learning to nurture and sustain myself. I was kneeling in the garden one Saturday, my hands dirty, when Carol came over with a cup of coffee. "I brought you this," she said. "Thought you might need a break." We sat on my back porch, looking at the yard, and she told me she'd been watching my transformation. Not just of the house, but of me. When you first moved in, years ago, you seemed so tense, she said, like you were always waiting for something bad to happen. But lately, you seem lighter, happier. "I am," I said. "I'm learning to live in a way that actually fits me. It's taken a while, but I'm getting there." "It suits you," she said simply. And that small affirmation from someone who barely knew me, but had noticed the change, meant more than she probably realized. In April, I decided to take a trip. Just a long weekend, nothing elaborate, but I wanted to go somewhere by myself to prove that I could. I chose a small coastal town a few hours away, a place I'd always wanted to visit, but Marcus had never been interested in. I booked a bed and breakfast, packed a small bag, and drove there on a Friday morning, feeling like an adventurer. The weekend was perfect in its simplicity. I walked on the beach. I visited local galleries and shops. I ate at restaurants overlooking the water. I read on a bench in the sun. I took photos, sketched in my notebook, talked to strangers, and spent long stretches of time in my own head, just thinking and being. And I never once felt lonely. I felt free. On Sunday evening, driving home, I realized something. I liked this version of my life. Not just tolerated it, not just was getting used to it, but actually liked it. Maybe even loved it. The independence, the self-direction, the space to figure out who I was and what I wanted without anyone else's input or approval. For the first time since my marriage ended, I wasn't looking forward to the time when I'd be in another relationship. I wasn't counting the days until I was part of a couple again. I was content with this, with me, with the life I was building. That didn't mean I wanted to be alone forever. I was open to the possibility of future relationships, future connections. But I wasn't desperate for them. I wasn't incomplete without them. I was whole, just as I was. And any future relationship would have to be with someone who understood that, who wanted to walk alongside me rather than leading or following, who saw me as a complete person rather than a half waiting to be made whole. By May, my house projects were mostly complete. There were always little things to do, maintenance and updates, but the major transformation was done. Every room reflected my taste, my choices, my life. I stood in each room one evening, doing a sort of tour of my own home, remembering what it had looked like a year ago and marveling at the change. The living room with its peachy walls and bright artwork. The dining room in sage green where I'd hosted several dinner parties. The yellow office where I worked and drew and sometimes just sat looking out the window. The bedroom with its floral bedding and sheer curtains that let in the morning light. The guest room I'd turned into a proper art studio with an easel and supplies organized neatly on shelves. Every space was intentional, purposeful, mine. But more than the physical changes, I thought about the internal ones, the way I'd learned to trust my own judgment, the way I developed confidence in my choices and my voice, the way I'd stopped apologizing for taking up space, for having preferences, for existing as my own person, the way I'd built a life that was rich and full and deeply satisfying, even without a partner. I thought about that first night, that terrifying silence, the panic I'd felt at being alone. And I thought about how much had changed since then. The silence was still there, but now it felt like possibility rather than emptiness. The house was still big, but now it felt like room to grow rather than too much space to fill. I was still alone, but I'd learned that alone was different from lonely. In June, a year after Marcus had moved out, I threw myself a party. Not a divorce party, not an anniversary party, just a celebration of life party. I invited everyone who'd been part of my journey, my sister and her family, my friends from book club and painting class and the garden club, my colleagues from work, my pottery instructor, even Carol and some of my other neighbors. I filled my house with people and food and music and laughter, and I looked around at this gathering and felt such gratitude. Linda found me in the kitchen again, just like she had at my last party. You know what's different about this party compared to 6 months ago? She asked. What? You're not in the kitchen hiding. You're in here because you need more wine glasses. But you're about to go right back out there. You're not afraid anymore. She was right. I wasn't afraid. Not of judgment, not of being seen, not of taking up space in my own home and my own life. I'd worked hard to get here, to this place of confidence and contentment, and I was proud of that work. Later that night, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up, I felt it again, that deep sense of rightness, of being exactly where I was supposed to be. This house, this life, this self I was becoming, it all felt aligned in a way nothing had felt during my marriage. I was living authentically, making choices that reflected my true preferences and values, building a life that actually fit me. I went upstairs to my bedroom and looked out the window at the garden below, visible in the moonlight. The flowers I'd planted were blooming now, bright pops of color even in the darkness. Tomorrow I'd spend time out there, tending them, enjoying them. Tomorrow I'd go to my pottery class and work on the set of bowls I was making. Tomorrow I'd sketch and read and maybe call a friend. Tomorrow I'd live another day of this life I'd created. But tonight I just stood at my window and felt grateful. Grateful for the courage it had taken to leave my marriage. Grateful for the support of people who loved me. Grateful for the time and space to figure out who I was outside of being someone's wife. Grateful for paint colors and watercolors and pottery clay and garden soil, all the mediums through which I'd expressed and discovered myself. Grateful for this house that had been a symbol of everything wrong with my marriage and had become a symbol of everything right about my new life. I thought about that opening hook, the one I'd written in my journal months ago. For 20 years, the silence in my own house was the thing I feared the most. Today, it's the only thing I search for. It was still true, but I understood it more deeply now. The silence I was searching for wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the presence of peace. It was the space to hear my own voice, my own thoughts, my own desires. It was the freedom to live according to my own rhythm and values. It was the sanctuary I'd created, both physically in this house and internally in myself. I was 46 now, divorced, living alone in a house I'd completely transformed, and that was worth celebrating. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more growth, more learning. There would be hard days and setbacks and moments of doubt, but I knew now that I could handle them. I'd proven to myself that I was resilient, capable, strong. I'd survived the ending of my marriage and the terror of being alone. And I'd done more than survive. I'd thrived. I'd created something beautiful from the rubble of what had fallen apart. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. And I saw someone I recognized, someone I liked, someone I was proud to be. For so long, I'd looked in mirrors and seen someone small, someone trying to be invisible, someone apologizing for existing. But now I saw someone whole, someone who took up space unapologetically, someone who had opinions and preferences and a voice she wasn't afraid to use. Someone who could be alone without being lonely, who could be independent without being isolated, who could be content without being coupled. I saw myself, finally, fully, clearly, and she was exactly who I wanted to be.